The air inside the car smelled faintly of leather and something sharper. Control, perhaps. Ariana Cole sat in the back seat with her hands resting loosely in her lap, though nothing about her was relaxed. The city blurred past the tinted window, lights stretching into distorted streaks, like time itself was trying to outrun what she had just agreed to. No one had forced her into the car. That was a detail that kept repeating in her mind. She had walked into the deal, and now there was no walking out. Across from her, Dominic Varelli watched in silence. He hadn't spoken since they left the warehouse, hadn't offered reassurance, threat, or even acknowledgement, but his presence filled the space like a quiet storm, contained, deliberate, dangerous. Ariana didn't look at him directly. She had already learned enough. Men like him didn't need to raise their voices. They didn't need to explain themselves. They simply decided. "You haven't asked a single question," Dominic finally said, his voice smooth, almost conversational. It slid into the silence like a blade. Ariana turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze for the first time since they'd left. "I already know the answer," she replied. One of his brows lifted. Barely, but enough to signal interest. "And what answer is that?" "That it doesn't matter what I ask," she said evenly. "You'll tell me only what benefits you." For a brief moment, something flickered in his expression. Not amusement, not approval. Recognition. Then it vanished. "Good," Dominic said. "It saves time." The car slowed as it turned into a long, gated drive. Iron gates opened before them without hesitation, as if even metal obeyed him. Beyond them stretched an estate that looked less like a home and more like a fortress disguised as luxury. Ariana felt it then, not fear, not exactly, finality. Once she stepped inside, whatever she had been before would no longer exist. The car came to a stop. A driver opened the door, but Ariana didn't move immediately. Her fingers curled slightly against her palm, nails pressing into skin just enough to ground her. This was the moment, not the deal, not the warehouse. This, the step forward. Second thoughts. Dominic asked, his tone almost bored. Ariana stepped out of the car. "No," she said, "just understanding the cost." His lips curved faintly, not a smile, but something close to it. "Most people don't," he said, "until it's too late." Inside, the estate was colder than she expected. Not in temperature, but in feeling. Every surface was immaculate. Every detail intentional. There were no personal touches, no signs of warmth, no evidence of softness. It wasn't a home. It was a command center. Ariana walked beside Dominic as if she belonged there, her posture straight, her expression controlled. But beneath the surface, her mind was moving fast, cataloging exits, distances, faces, patterns. Survival wasn't instinct for her. It was strategy. They entered a large room lined with dark wood and dim lighting. A single table stood at the center, already prepared. Papers, a pen, a glass of water. She knew better than to touch. Dominic gestured toward the chair. "Sit." She did. He remained standing. That was deliberate. Power didn't always need to be displayed. Sometimes it was arranged. "This is where you officially stop being Ariana Cole," he said. Her fingers stilled on the table. "And start being what?" she asked. "Useful." The word landed harder than she expected. Not because it was cruel, because it was accurate. Dominic walked slowly around the table, his steps measured, unhurried. "You will be placed into a family that believes you are an asset, a connection, a solution to a problem they don't yet realize exists." Ariana's eyes narrowed slightly. "A marriage?" "Yes." "To who?" "A son," Dominic said. "Important enough to matter, predictable enough to manipulate, and disposable enough to sacrifice," Ariana added quietly. Dominic stopped behind her. "Everything is disposable," he said. "The difference is who decides when." A silence stretched between them. Then Ariana spoke again, softer this time. "And me?" Dominic moved back into her line of sight. "You were chosen," he said, "because you can disappear without consequence." There it was. Not survival. Not opportunity. Erasure. Ariana leaned back slightly in her chair, studying him with a new kind of focus. "You're not just trying to destroy them," she said. "You're trying to erase them." Dominic didn't deny it. That bloodline ends, he said simply. And you are the knife. The word should have unsettled her. They didn't. What unsettled her was how easily she could see it working. How long do I have, she asked, to gain trust? Dominic shrugged slightly. As long as it takes. To die, she clarified. This time, there was no pause. That depends on how well you play your role. Ariana exhaled slowly. So that was the truth. There was no exit plan, no extraction, no survival clause. She wasn't part of the strategy. She was a strategy. And strategies were expendable. Her gaze dropped briefly to the papers on the table. Contracts, terms, signatures waiting to make everything irreversible. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered inside her. Fear, not of death, of disappearing without meaning. Then it was gone, replaced by something sharper. Decision. You're wrong about one thing, Ariana said, lifting her eyes back to his. Dominic's gaze sharpened slightly. Oh, I don't disappear without consequence. The room seemed to still. For the first time, Dominic looked at her as if reassessing, not her value, but her potential. Explain. Ariana tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. If I'm your knife, she said, then I decide how deep I cut. A slow, deliberate silence followed. Then Dominic smiled, not faintly, not subtly, fully. It was the kind of smile that didn't bring comfort. It confirmed danger. Good, he said. I was beginning to think I chose someone too obedient. Ariana reached for the pen. Her hand didn't shake. That surprised her more than anything. Once I sign this, she said, there's no going back. No, Dominic agreed. She looked down at the paper. Then, without hesitation, she signed. The sound of the pen against paper echoed louder than it should have. When she finished, she placed it back on the table with quiet precision. It's done, she said. Dominic picked up the document, scanning it briefly before setting it aside. Yes, he said. It is... Ariana stood. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Dominic stepped closer. Too close. His voice dropped, lower now, more personal. From this moment on, he said, you belong to the role I've given you. Ariana didn't step back, didn't flinch. Roles can be rewritten, she said. His gaze darkened slightly. Not this one. She held his stare. We'll see. Something dangerous passed between them then. Not hostility, not trust. Recognition. Two people who understood control. Two people who refused to surrender it. Dominic stepped away first. Your training begins tomorrow, he said. Everything you need to know, you'll learn quickly. And if I don't? Ariana asked. He didn't look back. Then you won't live long enough for it to matter. The door opened. A woman entered. Silent, efficient, already prepared. She'll take you to your room, Dominic said. Room, not home, not space. Containment. Ariana followed the woman through the halls, her step steady, her expression composed. But inside, her thoughts were shifting, rearranging, calculating. Disposable. That was what he believed. That was what everyone would believe. Good. Let them. The room she was led to was large, elegant, impersonal, like everything else in the house. The door closed behind her with a soft click. For the first time since the warehouse, she was alone. Ariana stood still for a moment, then slowly, carefully, her hand moved to her abdomen. It was subtle, instinctive, protective. Her breath caught just slightly. No one knew, not the men who sold her, not Dominic, not anyone. And if they did, the plan would change. No, it wouldn't change. It would become something worse. Her fingers pressed lightly, as if confirming what she already knew, what she had been trying not to think about, what she could no longer ignore. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just her life on the line. Ariana closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, clearer now, sharper. If Dominic Varelli thought she was his weapon, he had no idea what he had just unleashed, because she wasn't just a knife. She was a secret that could destroy everything, including him. And as she lowered her hand, her expression hardened with quiet, terrifying resolve. Ariana made a silent promise. She would play his game. She would follow his rules. She would become exactly what he needed her to be, until the moment it mattered most. Because by the time Dominic realized the truth, it would already be too late, and the child he never planned for would be the one thing he could never control. By the time Ariana Cole stepped into the DeLuca estate, she had already buried her real name twice. The first time had been on paper. The second had been somewhere deeper, quieter. Now, she wore a third identity like skin. Elena Rossi, a name soft enough to trust, forgettable enough to survive. The iron gates behind her closed with finality that echoed louder than the ones at Dominic Varelli's estate. But this felt different. There was no cold emptiness here, no sterile silence. This place was alive, not warm, alive. Voices carried faintly through the courtyard. Men moved with purpose, but not fear. Guards stood at attention, yet their eyes didn't dart nervously. They watched with confidence, not paranoia. Ariana noticed everything. The spacing between security posts, the rotation timing, the lack of visible panic. This wasn't a kingdom built on terror alone. It was built on loyalty. That, she knew, was far more dangerous. Miss Rossi. The voice pulled her attention forward. A man in a tailored suit approached, his posture relaxed but deliberate. Not a soldier, not a servant. Something in between. "Welcome to the DeLuca estate," he said politely. "We've been expecting you." Ariana offered a small, controlled smile. "Thank you." Her voice matched the identity. Gentle, composed, harmless. "A lie. Mr. DeLuca will meet you shortly," the man continued, gesturing toward the entrance. "If you'll follow me." She did. Each step forward was measured, her gaze quietly sweeping her surroundings without appearing to do so. The architecture was grand but not excessive. The decor carried history, real history, not manufactured dominance. Paintings lined the walls. Family portraits. Generations. Dominic had said this bloodline needed to be erased. Standing here, Ariana felt the weight of that statement differently. This wasn't just a target. It was a legacy. And legacies didn't disappear quietly. They resisted. Inside, the air shifted, warmer, heavier with presence. Conversations hummed in distant rooms. Footsteps echoed across marble floors. And somewhere far off, a glass shattered followed by laughter. Laughter. Ariana's fingers curled slightly at her side. That didn't fit. Not with the picture she had been given. Not with the monster she had been sent to destroy. "Please," the man said, opening a set of double doors. "Wait here." Ariana stepped inside. The room was expansive, lined with tall windows that let in muted daylight. A single desk stood near the far end, though it was empty. Bookshelves stretched across the walls, filled, not for decoration, but for use. She moved slowly, her steps silent, observing, absorbing. There were no obvious weaknesses, no careless exposures. Everything was balanced. That unsettled her more than chaos ever could. "You're not what I expected." The voice came from behind her, deep, calm, unhurried. Ariana turned. Adrian DeLuca stood in the doorway like he had always belonged there, which of course he did, but it wasn't just his presence that caught her attention. It was his stillness. He wasn't imposing it. He didn't need to. Tall, composed, dressed with effortless precision. He carried authority without displaying it. His gaze settled on her, sharp but not immediately hostile, assessing, curious. That was new. Ariana lowered her eyes just enough to appear respectful, then lifted them again. "Most people aren't," she replied softly. A faint shift touched his expression, almost amusement. "Maybe," Adrian said, stepping further into the room. "But most people don't walk into my house already calculating how to survive it." Ariana's pulse didn't spike, but something inside her sharpened. He noticed, too quickly. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said, her tone carefully neutral. Adrian stopped a few feet away, close enough to study her, far enough to remain in control. "Of course you don't," he said lightly. "That would ruin the performance." Silence stretched between them, not tense, but charged. Ariana held her ground. If he suspected something, he wasn't showing it directly, and that meant one thing. He was playing his own game. "Tell me, Elena Rossi," Adrian continued, her name rolling off his tongue like he was testing his weight. "What exactly do you think you're here for?" The question was simple. The answer was not. Ariana tilted her head slightly, letting just enough vulnerability show. "I was told your family required an arrangement," she said. "Something mutually beneficial." Adrian watched her for a long moment. Then he smiled. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind. It was knowing. "Mutual benefit," he repeated. "That's one way to describe it." He turned slightly, pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter on a nearby table. "Do you believe that?" he asked, not looking at her. Ariana didn't answer immediately. This was a test, not of information, of perception. "I believe," she said carefully, "that nothing in this world is ever truly mutual." Adrian glanced back at her. This time, there was no trace of amusement, only interest. "Good," he said. "Then we understand each other." Ariana studied him quietly. This wasn't what Dominic had described. There was no immediate cruelty, no unnecessary dominance, no attempt to break her. If anything, Adrian DeLuca was restrained, and that made him unpredictable. "Come," he said, setting his glass down. "If you're going to live here, you should understand what you've stepped into." "Hey." Rihanna followed him through the estate, her senses heightened. He didn't rush, didn't hide anything obvious. He showed her the halls, the main rooms, even parts of the operation. Men discussing shipments, others handling logistics, voices low but organized, structured, efficient, loyal. Every step reinforced the same unsettling realization. This wasn't a broken empire. It was a functioning one. At one point, they passed a young boy running down the corridor, laughing as someone called after him. Ariana froze, just for a fraction of a second. A child. Here, in this world. Adrian noticed. Of course he did. "He's my nephew," Adrian said casually. "We don't hide our lives from the next generation." Ariana's gaze lingered for a moment before she forced herself to move again. That didn't fit the narrative. Monsters didn't raise families. They destroyed them. "Does that surprise you?" Adrian asked. "Yes," Ariana admitted before she could stop herself. He studied her again, more closely this time. "Why?" Ariana hesitated. Because the truth wasn't something Elena Rossi should know, but something in his gaze. It pulled at honesty, dangerously. "I was told your world was built on fear," she said. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "It is," he said, "just not in the way you think." They stopped at a balcony overlooking the estate grounds. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the property. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian said quietly, "Fear keeps enemies away." Ariana glanced at him. "And what keeps your people here?" His answer came without hesitation. "Choice." The word hit harder than it should have. Choice. Ariana felt something shift inside her, small but undeniable, because she hadn't had one. Not really. And yet, these people stayed. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. That wasn't weakness. That was power. Ariana's chest tightened slightly, something unfamiliar threading through her thoughts. Doubt, not in her ability. In her mission. Dominic had called this family a disease, a corruption that needed to be erased. But standing here, watching, listening, nothing felt diseased. It felt human, and that was far more complicated. "You're thinking too much," Adrian said, his voice softer now. Ariana exhaled quietly. "Is that a problem?" "It can be," he said. "In places like this, overthinking gets people killed." She turned to face him fully. "And what keeps them alive?" Adrian met her gaze, understanding who the real enemy is. The words lingered between them, heavier than anything else he'd said. Ariana's heartbeat slowed, then sharpened, because for the first time since she accepted Dominic's deal, she wasn't entirely sure she knew the answer. And that was dangerous, very dangerous. Adrian stepped back slightly, breaking the moment. "You'll settle in tonight," he said. We'll discuss the arrangement tomorrow. Arrangement, marriage, infiltration, execution. Ariana nodded. Of course. He studied her one last time, as if trying to solve something he hadn't fully grasped yet. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her alone on the balcony. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching further across the ground. Ariana gripped the railing lightly, her mind racing now, not with strategy, but with something far more unsettling. Conflict. Everything she had been told, everything she had prepared for, it didn't align with what she was seeing. And that meant one of two things. Either Adrian DeLuca was far more dangerous than Dominic had warned, or Dominic had lied. Ariana's hand moved instinctively to her abdomen again, subtle, hidden. The weight of her secret pressed heavier now, because this mission wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about truth, and truth could destroy everything. Her gaze lifted toward the horizon, her expression no longer just guarded, but questioning. Because if Adrian wasn't the monster she had been sent to kill, then eliminating him wouldn't be justice. It would be something far worse. The DeLuca estate did not sleep. It breathed. Ariana felt in the quiet hours, between footsteps, between shifting shadows, between the low murmur of voices that never fully disappeared. Even in stillness, the place was alive, as if every wall held memory. Every corridor carried loyalty that refused to fade. And somehow, she had become part of its rhythm. Not fully, not safely, but enough to feel the difference. Days passed without clear markers, blending into a slow, controlled immersion. Ariana moved through this state with careful precision, learning without asking, observing without appearing to. Patterns revealed themselves, not through carelessness, but through consistency. Morning routines, guard rotations, silent signals exchanged between men who trusted each other without question. Nothing here relied on fear alone. That realization returned to her again and again, each time unsettling something deeper. Because fear was easy to manipulate. Loyalty was not. And Adrian DeLuca, he was at the center of it. Ariana rarely spoke to him directly. There were no long conversations, no forced proximity, no overt attempts to establish connection. Instead, there were moments, small, quiet, unavoidable, a passing glance across a room filled with voices, the subtle shift of his posture when she entered a space, the way his presence changed the atmosphere, not through dominance, but through control that didn't need to be proven. He trusted too easily. That was the first thought that had unsettled her. But the longer she watched, the more she realized it wasn't ease. It was certainty. Adrian didn't trust blindly. He trusted with awareness. And somehow, he had decided she was not a threat. That should have made her job easier. It didn't. It made it unbearable. One evening, Ariana found herself in the library again, the same room where she had first met him. The shelves no longer felt foreign. The silence no longer felt like a test. Now, it felt like a space where truths lingered unspoken. She moved slowly along the shelves, her fingers grazing the edges of worn spines. These weren't decorative choices. These were books that had been read, marked, returned to, lived in. She pulled one slightly from its place, pausing when she noticed the pages had been folded at the corners, not carelessly, but deliberately. Memory markers. Someone had come back to these words. More than once. You're looking for something. His voice didn't startle her anymore. That, too, had changed. Ariana didn't turn immediately. I don't think I know what that is yet, she said quietly. Adrian stepped into the room, his presence settling into the space like it belonged there more than anything else. Most people don't, he replied. Silence followed, not uncomfortable, but heavy with something unspoken. Ariana slid the book back into place. Why keep these? She asked, her gaze lingering on the shelves. You don't seem like someone who looks back. Adrian moved closer, but not enough to close the distance entirely. I don't, he said, but I remember. There was a difference. Ariana felt it immediately. What's the point of remembering, she asked softly, if it doesn't change anything? Adrian's gaze shifted slightly, not away, but inward. It does change something, he said. Ariana turned to face him. What? A pause. Then, it changes who you trust. The words settled between them, heavier than they should have been. Ariana felt something tighten in her chest. Because trust, that was exactly what she was breaking, and he didn't even know it. Her gaze dropped for a brief second before she forced it steady again. Trust seems dangerous, she said. It is, Adrian agreed. Then why risk it? This time, his answer didn't come immediately. When it did, it was quieter, because living without it is worse. Ariana held his gaze, and for a moment, she saw it, not the power, not the control, but the absence of something that had once existed and been taken away. Loss, not recent, not raw, but permanent. And suddenly, Dominic's version of Adrian began to fracture. Monsters didn't carry loss like that. They caused it. Ariana turned away slightly, the weight of that realization pressing heavier than anything else. You were betrayed, she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Adrian didn't react with surprise or denial. Everyone is, he said. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed. It's not. Silence stretched again, but this time it carried something sharper, closer. Ariana felt in the space between them, in the way neither of them moved to leave. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't strategy. This was something else. Something far more dangerous. Because it wasn't about what she needed to do. It was about what she was starting to feel. And that could destroy everything. Her hand moved instinctively, subtly, pressing against her abdomen before she could stop herself. The motion was small, almost invisible. But Adrian noticed. Of course he did. His gaze shifted, narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in awareness. You're not well, he said. It wasn't a question. Ariana straightened slightly, forcing composure back into place. I'm fine. He didn't respond immediately, just watched her, assessing, weighing, deciding whether to push further. Then he stepped back. Don't mistake endurance for strength, he said quietly. The words lingered long after he turned away. Ariana remained where she was, her breath steady but her thoughts anything but. Endurance, strength, survival. She had built her entire life on those distinctions. But now they felt blurred, because surviving this mission wasn't just about staying alive anymore. It was about what she would have to become to complete it, and what she might lose in the process. Later that night, alone in her room, Ariana stood in front of the mirror, her reflection sharper under the dim light. She looked the same. No visible changes. No obvious signs. But she could feel it now. The exhaustion that came too quickly. The subtle shifts in her body. The quiet, undeniable truth she could no longer ignore. Life growing inside her. A bitter irony curled in her chest. She had been sent here to destroy a bloodline, and instead she was carrying one. Her fingers pressed gently against her abdomen, her expression tightening. Not with fear, but with something more complex. Conflict, because this wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a contradiction. Everything about her mission demanded destruction, but her body, it was creating, protecting, defying. Ariana closed her eyes briefly, her breath slowing as a single thought cut through everything else. You cannot carry life into a place built for death without changing the outcome. Her eyes open again, sharper now, because that was the truth Dominic had never accounted for. He had planned for strategy, for obedience, for sacrifice, but not this, never this. And that meant she had something he couldn't control, something no one could. The next day, the shift between her and Adrian was almost imperceptible, but it was there, in the way his gaze lingered a second longer than before, in the way she no longer avoided it, in the quiet understanding that had formed, not spoken, not acknowledged, but present, dangerously present. They moved around each other like two people aware of something neither was ready to confront, and yet neither stepped away, because distance would have been safer. But neither of them chose it. That was the problem. That was the mistake. Because the closer Ariana got, the more the lines blurred. Enemy, target, monster, none of those words fit anymore. And without them, the mission began to unravel. One evening, as the sun dipped low again, casting the state in gold and shadow, Ariana stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching from a distance as Adrian spoke with his men. There was no fear in their posture, no hesitation, only respect, loyalty, choice. The same word echoed in her mind again, and for the first time, she understood it, because she had one now. Not the illusion of it, not the forced version she had accepted before. A real one. She could still complete the mission. She could still follow Dominic's plan. She could still become the knife. But she could also choose not to. The realization hit her like a quiet, irreversible shift, because that choice came with consequences, not just for her, for everything, for everyone. Her hand moved again, resting against her abdomen, her gaze never leaving Adrian. And then it happened. Not a movement, not a visible sign. Something deeper, a connection her mind had refused to make until now. Pieces aligning, details resurfacing, timing, circumstance, memory. Her breath caught. No, that wasn't possible. It couldn't be, but it was. The truth settled into her with quiet, devastating clarity. Not Dominic, not some faceless past, not chance. Her fingers curled slightly as the weight of it fully formed, because the life growing inside her, the secret she had been protecting, the one thing that could destroy everything, wasn't just tied to this world. It belonged to it, belonged to him. As Ariana's gaze locked onto Adrian DeLuca, her entire reality shifted in a single, irreversible moment, because the child she was carrying was his. The realization did not shatter Ariana. It settled, slow, heavy, unavoidable, like a truth that had always existed beneath the surface, waiting for the exact moment she could no longer escape it. She didn't move from the courtyard. Couldn't, because across from her, Adrian DeLuca stood unaware, still speaking, still commanding, still existing in a reality that had just been violently rewritten for her. Not for him. For her. Her fingers pressed harder against her abdomen, as if grounding herself in something real, because nothing else felt stable anymore. The child is his. The thought didn't echo. It anchored, and with it came something far more dangerous than fear. Understanding. Ariana turned away abruptly, her steps controlled but faster now as she moved back into this state. Her mind was no longer observing. It was connecting. Every detail, every coincidence, every carefully placed moment. None of it felt accidental anymore. Not the deal, not her selection, not even the timing. By the time she reached her room, the air felt thinner, tighter, like the walls had shifted closer without warning. She closed the door behind her and stood still. Then she moved, fast. Drawers opened, papers shifted. The small details she had ignored before, dismissed as irrelevant, now demanded attention. Dominic had given her limited information. Too limited. At the time, she had assumed it was control. Now, it felt like design. Ariana pulled out the thin folder she had been given at the start of the mission. It was minimal, strategic, deceptively simple. The DeLuca Syndicate. Target. Adrian DeLuca. Objective. Infiltration, destabilization, elimination. Clean. Efficient. Incomplete. Her eyes scanned the pages again, but this time she wasn't reading what was there. She was looking for what wasn't, and that was where the truth began to bleed through. No detailed history. No real explanation of the conflict. No clear origin of the supposed war. Just conclusions. Dominic hadn't given her facts. He had given her a narrative. Ariana's breath slowed, sharpened, because narratives could be controlled. Facts could not. She moved to the desk, pulling open the drawer where she had hidden the small access device she had quietly taken days ago. Something meant for internal systems, not for someone like her. But Ariana had never been someone like her. Not really. The screen flickered to life. Encrypted systems. Layered protections. But nothing was ever impenetrable. Only time-consuming. And Ariana had learned long ago, time could be stolen. Minutes passed. Then more. Her fingers moved with precision, her focus absolute as she bypassed surface-level restrictions, digging deeper. Not into the DeLuca systems. Into something else. Something older. Something buried. Dominic Varelli. The name alone opened doors that should have remained closed. Records began to surface, fragmented, scattered, but enough. Enough to start forming a picture. And what Ariana saw, it didn't match the man she thought she knew. It didn't match the story she had been told. Because Dominic's connection to the DeLuca family, it wasn't distant. It wasn't recent. It was personal. Deeply personal. Ariana leaned closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing as the pieces aligned. Years ago, before power had fully shifted, before the current structure of both syndicates had solidified, there had been an alliance. Not formal, not public, but real. Dominic Varelli had not always been the enemy. He had once been, inside, trusted, connected, and then something had broken. Not a simple betrayal. Something far more calculated. The records didn't state it directly, but they didn't need to, because the pattern was clear. Dominic hadn't been pushed out. He had left, and when he did, he had taken something with him. Something that changed everything. Ariana's chest tightened, because that wasn't revenge. That wasn't war. That was strategy. Long-term, patient, ruthless. Her mind moved faster now, pulling every thread together. The enemy bloodline. The need to erase it. The obsession with Adrian. None of it was about justice. It was about control. Always had been. Ariana leaned back slowly, her pulse steady but heavy. Control doesn't destroy a bloodline, she murmured under her breath. It replaces it. The realization hit with quiet force. That was the plan. Not elimination. Replacement. Dominic didn't want the DeLuca family gone. He wanted it his. Rewritten, reshaped, reclaimed, and suddenly everything made sense. Why Ariana had been chosen, not just for her skills, not just for her situation, but for something else, something far more specific. Her hand moved again, instinctively, protectively. The child, her stomach twisted, not with fear, but with something colder. Because if this was about bloodlines, then her pregnancy wasn't a complication. It was a requirement. Ariana's breath caught, the thought slicing through her with terrifying clarity. No. But even as she said it, she knew. Nothing about this had been accidental. Not the timing, not the proximity, not even Adrian. Her mind raced backward, pulling apart memories she had accepted too easily. The night everything had begun. The way Dominic had watched her, not just assessing, but calculating, selecting. Not a random woman, not a convenient pawn. A precise choice. A vessel. The word hit harder than anything else. Ariana pushed away from the desk, pacing once across the room before stopping again. No, she said again, stronger this time. But denial didn't change truth, and the truth was already there, fully formed, fully realized. Dominic hadn't sent her to destroy Adrian. He had sent her to bind him, through blood, through legacy, through something neither side could easily break. Her stomach turned, because that meant this child was never meant to be hers. Not really. It was meant to be his. Dominic's. A tool, a claim, a future he could control. Ariana's chest tightened as something sharper replaced confusion. Anger. Not loud, not explosive. Cold, focused, because for the first time, she saw her place in the plan clearly. Not a knife, not even a pawn. Something far worse. A bridge between two empires, between two bloodlines, between power and control. And bridges were built to be used, then destroyed. Her breathing steadied, her thoughts aligning with terrifying precision. If control is the goal, she whispered, her voice barely audible, then everything else is expendable. Everything, including her, including Adrian, including the child. A sudden chill ran through her, because there was one question she hadn't answered yet, one piece that didn't fully fit. If Dominic needed the child, if this had all been planned, then, did he know? Ariana's gaze snapped back to the screen. Her fingers moved again, faster now, sharper, digging deeper into communications, restricted logs, hidden exchanges, fragments of conversations not meant to be found. For a moment, nothing. Then, a file, encrypted differently. Not standard, not routine, personal. Ariana hesitated for only a second before breaking into it. The screen flickered. Then text appeared. Minimal, precise, Dominic style. Her eyes scanned the message once. Then again, then a third time, slower, because her mind refused to process it all at once. Ensure timeline remains intact. The woman must not be compromised before integration is complete. The child is essential. Ariana's breath stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Her fingers hovered over the screen, unmoving, because there it was. Not implied. Not suspected. Confirmed. He knew. From the beginning. Not discovered. Not guessed. Planned. Her selection. Her placement. Her proximity to Adrian. Everything. Deliberate. Her stomach twisted violently. Her hand pressing against it, as if she could shield what was already exposed. The child is essential, not important, not valuable, essential, a requirement in a plan that had never included her survival. Ariana staggered back slightly, her shoulder hitting the wall behind her. The room felt smaller now, colder, like the truth itself had taken up space. And there was no escaping it. She wasn't protecting a secret. She was carrying a weapon. And Dominic, he had known all along. Ariana's eyes lifted slowly, her expression no longer conflicted, no longer uncertain. Something else had taken its place, something sharper, more dangerous, because now she wasn't just part of the plan. She understood it, and understanding changed everything. Her fingers curled protectively over her abdomen, her gaze hardening with quiet, rising fury. Because if Dominic Varelli thought he could control this, control her, control the life growing inside her, then he had made one critical mistake. He had told her the truth. And as Ariana stepped away from the screen, her entire path shifting in a single, irreversible decision, she realized something that changed the rules of the game completely. Dominic hadn't just planned for the child. He had planned to take it. The truth did not break Ariana. It refined her. By morning, nothing in her expression revealed the storm that had rewritten her purpose. She moved through the DeLuca estate with the same measured grace, the same quiet awareness. But something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. Before, she had been surviving. Now, she was calculating, because survival was no longer the objective. Control was, and control required patience, precision, and the willingness to let others believe they were winning. Ariana stepped into the corridor just as the household began to stir, her senses already tuned to the rhythm she had memorized over days. Nothing appeared different. That was the danger, because beneath stability, movement had begun. Dominic wouldn't wait. Not anymore. He knew she was in position. He knew the timeline. And now, he would start applying pressure. Ariana felt it before she saw it. In the guards who weren't part of the usual rotation. In the subtle shifts of communication between staff, in the almost imperceptible tension threading through spaces that had once felt balanced. Someone new was watching, not Adrian's men, not entirely. Dominic had extended his reach. Of course he had. Ariana kept walking, her expression neutral, her pace unchanged. But inside, her strategy was already unfolding. She couldn't stop the game, but she could slow it, redirect it, distort it. That was how you survived something bigger than you. You didn't fight it directly. You changed its shape. Adrian appeared at the far end of the hall, speaking quietly with one of his men. The moment was brief, just long enough for Ariana to observe what others might miss. A slight shift in his posture, a tightening at the edge of his jaw. He felt it too, the disruption. Good. That meant he wasn't blind. But he didn't know the source. And Ariana, she couldn't let him find out. Not yet, because the truth wouldn't just put him in danger. It would put the child in danger. Her hand brushed lightly against her abdomen as she passed by, the motion subtle, hidden within the natural flow of her movement. Everything she did now, every step, every glance, every decision, was no longer just about survival. It was about protection, not just of herself, of something that had already become more important than anything else. The thought settled deep, anchoring her in a way nothing else had. You don't play for yourself anymore. The realization wasn't soft. It was sharp, unforgiving, because it meant one thing. She could no longer afford mistakes. By midday, Ariana had already made 3 small adjustments. None of them obvious, none of them traceable, but each one critical. A message that should have reached Adrian's inner circle was delayed by 20 minutes. A guard rotation shifted just enough to create a gap, then corrected before it could raise suspicion. A name in a report was subtly altered. Tiny changes, insignificant on their own, but together they bent the timeline. And time was the one thing Dominic needed to maintain control. Ariana intended to take it from him. She stood by the window in one of the quieter rooms, her gaze distant but her mind precise. Dominic's plan depended on predictability, on obedience, on her playing the role he had assigned. So she would, perfectly, until the moment she didn't. A knock came at the door. Ariana turned slightly. "Come in." The door opened. One of Adrian's men stepped inside. Luca, if she remembered correctly. Quiet, observant, not easily fooled. "You've been requested downstairs," he said. Requested, not ordered. Another difference. Ariana nodded once and followed without question. The room she entered was not unfamiliar. But the atmosphere was tighter, focused. Adrian stood near the center. Several men around him. A map spread across the table. Strategy, real strategy, not performance, not intimidation. This was how power moved when it didn't need to prove itself. Ariana remained near the edge, unnoticed by most, but not by him. Adrian's gaze flicked to her briefly, just long enough to acknowledge her presence. Then back to the map. "We have interference," he said calmly. "Not external. Internal disruption." Ariana's pulse didn't change, but her attention sharpened. Internal. He was closer than she expected. "Someone is adjusting information," another man said. "Small inconsistencies." Ariana remained still, invisible, listening. Adrian's expression didn't shift. "Not mistakes," he said. "Intentional." Silence followed, because that changed everything. Mistakes could be corrected. Intent had direction. "Find the pattern," Adrian continued. "Not the action." Ariana felt it then. Not fear. Respect. Because he understood something most didn't. That the smallest changes often carried the largest consequences. And that meant she would have to be better, smarter, faster. Because Adrian wasn't just reacting. He was adapting. The meeting continued, but Ariana's focus had already shifted. The game was tightening. Both sides were moving now, and she was standing between them, holding threads that could unravel everything. That night, the weight of it pressed heavier than before, not in her mind, in her body. The exhaustion came quicker now, sharper. Her reflection in the mirror revealed what others still couldn't see, but what she felt with increasing certainty. Time wasn't just moving, it was accelerating. Her hand rested against her abdomen again, her breathing steady but her thoughts anything but. This child was no longer just a secret. It was a deadline, because the longer she stayed, the harder it would be to hide. And the moment it was revealed, everything would change. A soft sound behind her broke the silence. Not a knock, not movement, presence. Ariana turned and froze. Adrian stood in the doorway. She hadn't heard him enter, hadn't sensed him. That alone was dangerous. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said quietly. "You didn't," she replied, though it wasn't entirely true. His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than usual. Not suspicious, not accusing. Something else. Searching. "You've changed," he said. The words were simple, but they cut deeper than anything else he could have said, because they were true. Ariana held his gaze, her expression controlled. "So have you," she said. A faint shift crossed his face. "Have I?" "Yes." "How?" Ariana hesitated. Not because she didn't know the answer, because saying it made it real. "You're watching more closely," she said, "like you're expecting something." Adrian studied her. "And you're not." The question lingered between them, heavy, unavoidable. Ariana didn't answer, because the truth, would expose everything. Silence stretched. Then Adrian stepped back slightly. "Be careful," he said quietly. Ariana's breath stilled. "Of what?" His gaze held hers. "Of being in the wrong place when things shift." The words carried weight. Not threat, warning. And that was what made it dangerous. Because he wasn't trying to control her. He was trying to protect her. Ariana felt something tighten in her chest. Guilt. Sharp. Unwelcome. Because she was the reason things were shifting. She was the disruption. The threat. And he didn't even know it. Adrian turned to leave. Then paused. Just slightly. "As long as you're here," he added, without looking back, "you're under my protection." The door closed behind him, and Ariana stood there, completely still, because protection was the one thing she could not allow herself to accept. Not from him. Not now. Not when she was the very thing that could destroy him. Her hand pressed more firmly against her abdomen, her eyes closing briefly as the weight of everything settled deeper. This was no longer a mission. It was a war, not between families, between truths, and she was standing at the center of it, holding a future that didn't belong to either side. A future that could rewrite everything, but only if she survived long enough to choose it. The next morning came with a shift Ariana could no longer ignore. Eyes lingered longer. Conversation stopped when she entered. Not everyone, but someone. Someone had started looking closer. Too close. Ariana moved carefully. Her awareness heightened as she traced a subtle change back through the estate. Patterns, glances, absences, and then she found it, not in a room, not in a conversation, in a person, standing across the hall, partially shadowed but watching with quiet, unwavering focus. Not suspicion, recognition. Ariana's breath slowed, because that look, that wasn't discovery. It was confirmation. The woman stepped forward slowly, older, composed, powerful in a way that didn't need to be displayed. And then her gaze dropped, not to Ariana's face, to her abdomen. A single glance, barely a second, but it was enough. Everything inside Ariana went still, because in that moment, there was no denial left, no concealment, no illusion. She knew. The woman lifted her eyes again, meeting Ariana's gaze directly. And then, something unexpected happened. There was no alarm, no accusation, no immediate reaction. Only a quiet, unreadable understanding. And as the silence stretched between them, heavier than any confrontation, Ariana realized something far more dangerous than discovery had just occurred. Because the person who uncovered her secret wasn't trying to expose her. The silence between them did not feel accidental. It felt chosen. Ariana stood motionless in the corridor, her pulse steady only because she forced it to be. Across from her, the woman did not move closer, did not speak, did not call for anyone. She simply watched. And that, more than anything, confirmed it. She knew, not guessed, not suspected, knew. Ariana's instincts sharpened instantly. Every possible outcome flashing through her mind in rapid succession. Exposure, confrontation, containment, death. Her hand didn't move this time. She didn't touch her abdomen, didn't reveal even the smallest protective instinct, because survival now depended on denial, on control, on not reacting. The woman took a single step forward, then another, measured, unhurried, power without urgency. "You shouldn't stand like that," she said quietly. Ariana's breath slowed. "Like what?" she asked, her tone neutral. The woman's gaze lowered again, briefly, deliberately, like you're carrying something fragile in a place built to break it. The words landed with quiet precision, not accusation, recognition. Ariana held her gaze, her expression unreadable. "Then maybe," Ariana replied, "it doesn't break as easily as you think." A flicker of something passed through the woman's eyes. Approval? No. Understanding. "That depends," she said softly, "on who it belongs to." The question wasn't spoken, but it was there. And suddenly, the air shifted, because this wasn't just about discovery. This was about truth. Ariana's mind moved quickly, calculating every possible version of that truth, and which one would keep her alive the longest. But before she could respond, the woman spoke again. "You're not afraid," she observed. "I am," Ariana said. "Not of me?" "No, not of her." And that was the problem, because the real threat wasn't standing in front of her. It was somewhere else, watching, waiting, planning. The woman stepped closer now, close enough that Ariana could see the fine details of her expression, lines not of age but of experience. "You're carrying something that changes everything," she said quietly. Ariana didn't respond, because she couldn't, because if she spoke, it would become real in a way she wasn't ready to face. The woman tilted her head slightly. "And you don't even know what it is yet," she added. That made Ariana's breath falter, just slightly, but enough for the woman to see it. A shift, a crack, and suddenly the balance of control tilted. "What do you mean?" Ariana asked, before she could stop herself. The woman studied her for a long moment. Then she stepped back, not retreating, creating space. "For someone placed so carefully," she said, "you should have been told more." Ariana's chest tightened. Placed, not chosen, not sent, placed. The word echoed in her mind, pulling at everything she had already begun to suspect. "You're assuming things," Ariana said, though the certainty in her voice had thinned. "No," the woman replied calmly. "I'm confirming them." Silence fell again, heavier this time, because now there was no pretending, no illusion left to hold on to. The woman turned slightly, as if preparing to leave, then paused. "One question," she said. Ariana didn't respond, but she didn't need to. The question came anyway. "Do you know who the father is?" The world didn't stop, but something inside Ariana did, because until now, she had believed she knew. Adrian, that had been the truth she had built everything around. The reason the mission had begun to fracture, the reason she had hesitated, the reason she had started to choose differently. But now, that certainty felt unstable. And that was terrifying. Ariana's silence stretched too long. The woman watched her carefully, then nodded once. "You don't," she said. Not cruel, not mocking. Final. And then she walked away, leaving Ariana alone in the corridor with a truth that had just begun to unravel. The room felt smaller when Ariana returned, not physically, mentally, because every thought now carried weight, every assumption, doubt. She paced once, twice, then stopped, gripping the edge of the desk as her mind began to reconstruct everything from the beginning, not from the mission, from before Dominic, before the deal, before the moment she believed her life had fallen apart. Because that was where the answer had to be, not in the present, in the past. Her breathing slowed as memories surfaced, one she had dismissed, ignored, buried under survival. A night she hadn't questioned, a moment that hadn't seemed significant, a presence she hadn't fully seen, because she hadn't been meant to, because it hadn't been random. Nothing had been. Ariana's grip tightened. No! But the pieces were already aligning. Dominic's timing, his certainty, his control. He hadn't needed her to get close to Adrian. Not for that. That had been part of the illusion, part of the manipulation, because the truth, the real truth, had already been set in motion long before she stepped into the DeLuca estate. Her breath caught sharply, because if Adrian wasn't the father, then there was only one possibility left, and that possibility changed everything. Ariana's body went still, her thoughts locking into place with terrifying clarity. Dominic. The realization hit like a silent explosion. Not loud, not chaotic, precise, devastating, because it explained everything. The selection, the control, the lack of concern for her survival, the insistence on timing, the phrase, "the child is essential," not because it connected two bloodlines, but because it didn't, because it was his, entirely. Dominic hadn't created a bridge. He had created a claim. Ariana staggered back slightly, her mind racing now, not with confusion, but with horrifying understanding. This wasn't about merging power. It was about replacing it. Dominic didn't need Adrian's bloodline. He needed access to it, through her, through the child, through something that could exist inside the DeLuca world, without belonging to it, and then control it from within. A slow, suffocating realization settled over her. Adrian, he wasn't the center of the plan. He was the obstacle. And worse, he didn't even know it. Ariana's hand finally moved again, pressing against her abdomen as the full weight of it crashed into her. This isn't his child. The words felt foreign, wrong, but true. Pain twisted through her chest, not physical, but something deeper, because everything she had started to feel, the hesitation, the conflict, the connection, had been built on a lie she didn't even know she was believing. And Adrian, he was protecting her, protecting something that belonged to his enemy. A bitter, broken laugh almost escaped her, but it died before it could form, because there was nothing amusing about this, only betrayal, layered, calculated, absolute. Dominic hadn't just used her, he had designed her, her choices, her path, her body, everything. Ariana's knees nearly gave out, but she caught herself, gripping the edge of the desk again as her breathing turned uneven. For the first time since this began, she felt it, not fear, not strategy. Something raw, something uncontrollable, rage. It burned through her, sharp and consuming, because this wasn't survival anymore. This was ownership, and Dominic believed he owned everything. Her, the child, the future. Ariana's eyes lifted slowly, her expression no longer conflicted, no longer uncertain. Something had changed, irreversibly, because now she knew exactly what the child was. Not a secret, not just life. Power. The kind of power men built empires around, destroyed families for, killed without hesitation to possess. And she was carrying it, unprotected, exposed, hunted. The thought hit her instantly, cold, immediate, because if she had figured it out, Dominic would assume others could too. And Dominic, he didn't take risks. He eliminated them. Ariana's breath stilled, because suddenly the plan shifted. Not forward, backward, correction, containment, removal. Her hand pressed harder against her abdomen, her entire body going rigid as a final realization settled in. If Dominic found her now, if he believed there was even the slightest chance she would deviate, he wouldn't wait. He wouldn't negotiate. He wouldn't risk losing control. He would end it. Not just her, the child, everything. Ariana's gaze snapped toward the door, her senses sharpening with sudden, urgent clarity, because the game had changed again. And this time, there were no sides left, no alliances, no illusions. Only one truth remained. She wasn't a player anymore. She was a prize. And prizes didn't get to choose their fate, unless they took control first. Ariana straightened slowly, her expression hardening with something far more dangerous than fear. Decision, because now there was only one path left. Not survival, not obedience, not even strategy. Escape before Dominic reached her, before the truth reached anyone else, before the child became something she could no longer protect. Her fingers curled protectively, her voice barely a whisper as a final, terrifying certainty locked into place. If he find me now, the words didn't need to be finished, because she already knew the ending, and it was one she would never allow. Because if Dominic Varelli reached her before she could disappear, neither she nor the child would survive. The shift did not come with warning. It came with absence. By the time Ariana stepped into the main corridor that morning, something fundamental had already broken inside the DeLuca estate. Not visibly, not loudly, but in the spaces between movement. Men who once stood with quiet certainty now spoke in lower tones. Eyes lingered longer. Hands stayed closer to weapons they didn't used to think about. The balance was gone, and in its place, war had begun, not declared, not formal, but inevitable. Ariana felt it immediately, her senses sharpening as she moved through the estate with calculated calm. Nothing about her outward demeanor changed, but internally, everything had shifted, because this wasn't about infiltration anymore. It wasn't about completing Dominic's plan. It was about surviving what that plan had unleashed, and more importantly, protecting what it had created. Her hand hovered near her abdomen, but didn't touch. Not here, not where eyes were watching, because they were. Everywhere. The DeLuca family wasn't blind. They felt the pressure. They knew something was closing in. They just didn't know what. Or who. Adrian stood at the center of it, not reacting, not panicking, adapting. Ariana saw in the way he moved, more deliberate now, more precise. Orders were quieter, but faster. Decisions made without hesitation. He was preparing for something he hadn't fully seen yet. And that made him dangerous. But not dangerous enough. Not yet. Because Dominic didn't fight visible wars. He created invisible ones. And Ariana, she was standing at the intersection of both. By midday, the first fracture appeared. A shipment never arrived. Not delayed. Gone. No trace. No signal. No explanation. It wasn't theft. It was a message. Adrian didn't react publicly, but Ariana saw the shift. A tightening. A recalculation. Because this wasn't random. It was targeted. Precise. Strategic. Dominic had begun. Ariana stood at a distance, watching as information passed between Adrian's men, tension tightening the space around them. She didn't need to hear the details. She already knew this was pressure, a test, not of strength, of response. And if Adrian responded too aggressively, Dominic would escalate. If he hesitated, Dominic would close in. There was no winning this directly, only delaying it. Ariana turned away before anyone could notice the shift in her expression, because she had already made her decision. Not fully, not consciously, but instinctively. She would not let Adrian walk blindly into Dominic's design. Not because she trusted him, not because she believed in him, but because he was not the enemy. And the child would not survive a war like this. That night, Ariana made her first visible move. Not obvious, not reckless, but intentional. A report meant for Adrian's inner circle was altered, not in content, but in timing. Information arrived sooner than expected. A location flagged earlier than it should have been. Enough to shift attention. Enough to redirect movement. Enough to keep Adrian away from a place Ariana knew would become dangerous within hours. She didn't warn him, didn't speak, didn't reveal, because words created questions, and questions would expose everything. So she used action instead. Controlled, precise, silent. And Adrian, he noticed. Of course he did. The next time their paths crossed, it wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. The hallway was empty, the tension of the estate pressing in around them like a living thing. Ariana moved first, not toward him, past him, but just as she did, she slowed. Not enough to draw attention, just enough to create a moment, a shift, a signal. Adrian's gaze followed her instantly, sharp, focused, aware, and in that single second, everything changed, because he understood, not fully, not clearly, but enough to know she wasn't what she seemed. Ariana didn't look back, didn't stop, but she felt it, the shift in his perception, the beginning of suspicion, and strangely, it didn't feel like danger. It felt like inevitability. The pressure increased the next day, and the next, small disruptions turned into calculated strikes, information leaks, interference in communication, movements predicted before they were made. Dominic was tightening the net, and Ariana, she was running out of time. Her body reminded her of it constantly now. The exhaustion, the subtle strain, the quiet, undeniable presence of life growing inside her, a deadline, a vulnerability, a reason. Everything she did now, every choice, every risk, was no longer about survival alone. It was about ensuring a future, even if she wouldn't be part of it. The thought didn't scare her. It clarified her, because sacrifice had stopped being an abstract concept. It had become real, personal, necessary. Adrian confronted her, without words. It happened in the training room. Empty, quiet, away from the chaos building elsewhere. Ariana stepped inside, expecting solitude. Instead, she found him already there, watching, waiting, not angry, not aggressive, but certain. "You've been changing things," he said. Not a question. Ariana didn't deny it, didn't confirm it. She simply held his gaze, because this moment, it mattered more than any other. "Why?" he asked. Silence stretched between them, heavy, loaded. Ariana could have lied, deflected, played the role, but something stopped her. Not trust, not weakness, something else, something deeper. Instead of answering, she moved, slowly, deliberately, toward the table beside them. A map lay open, strategic points marked, movements planned, future decisions already set. Ariana reached out and shifted one marker, just slightly, barely noticeable, but intentional. Then she stepped back and said nothing. Adrian's gaze dropped to the map, then back to her, and in that moment, understanding clicked. Not complete, not comfortable, but undeniable. "You're trying to stop something," he said quietly. Ariana didn't answer, because the truth was too big for words, and too dangerous to speak. The war escalated faster after that, because Dominic, he felt it, the resistance, the delay, the disruption, and he didn't tolerate interference. Not from enemies, not from his own. Ariana knew what came next. Not because she had been told, because she understood him. He wouldn't wait anymore. He would act, directly, decisively, and when he did, there would be no room left to hide. That night, Ariana stood alone at the edge of the estate, the darkness stretching out before her like an unanswered question. Escape, it was still possible. Barely. A narrow window, a single path. She could leave, disappear, take the child and run before Dominic closed the distance completely. She could survive, maybe, but survival wasn't the only variable anymore, because leaving meant one thing. Adrian would be exposed, unprotected, walking straight into a war he didn't fully understand. And the child would grow up in a world shaped entirely by Dominic, controlled, owned, used. Ariana's eyes closed briefly, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel it fully, the weight of the choice, not between right and wrong, but between loss and sacrifice. You don't get both. The truth settled deep, unforgiving, because no matter what she chose, something would be lost. The question was, what mattered more, her survival or the future she carried? Ariana opened her eyes slowly, her expression no longer uncertain, no longer divided, resolved, because she understood something now that she hadn't before. Survival wasn't about escaping. It was about deciding what was worth staying for, and what was worth risking everything to protect. By dawn, she made her move, not toward safety, toward danger, deliberately, a calculated step that placed her directly into Dominic's line of sight, exposed, reachable, exactly where he would expect her to be, and exactly where she needed to be, because this wasn't surrender. It was positioning, the beginning of something larger, something Dominic wouldn't anticipate, because for the first time, Ariana wasn't reacting to his plan. She was rewriting it, and as she stepped forward into the path that led straight toward the man who had designed her fate, her pulse steady, her resolve absolute, Ariana made a choice that changed everything, because walking into Dominic's reach was the only way to destroy him. The moment Ariana stepped into Dominic Varelli's reach, the war changed, not in noise, not in chaos, in control, because for the first time since this began, he wasn't the only one who understood the full board. The location was exactly what she expected, isolated, controlled, clean. Dominic never chose places that required improvisation. He chose certainty. And Ariana, she had walked into it willingly. The doors closed behind her with a quiet finality, sealing the space like a decision that could no longer be undone. Dominic stood at the center of the room, exactly where power naturally gravitated, unmoved, unshaken, certain. His gaze settled on her instantly, not with surprise, not with suspicion, with recognition. "You came back," he said. "Not a question. A conclusion." Ariana didn't step closer, didn't lower her gaze. "I didn't run," she replied. A faint smile touched his lips. "I never thought you would." That was the truth. Not trust, not belief. Prediction. Dominic didn't deal in uncertainty. He dealt in outcomes. "You've delayed things," he continued, his voice calm but edged with something sharper beneath. "Small disruptions. Inefficient." Ariana said nothing, because explanation wasn't part of this. Understanding was. "You've always been intelligent," Dominic added. "But intelligence without direction becomes disobedience." Ariana's expression didn't change. "And control without awareness becomes failure," she replied. The words landed, not loudly, but precisely. Dominic's eyes sharpened just slightly, because she had shifted something. Not the balance, the expectation. "You think you understand what's happening," he said. Ariana took a single step forward. "Not think," she said quietly. "I know." Silence stretched between them, and for the first time, Dominic studied her differently, not as an asset, not as a tool, as a variable, uncontrolled, unpredictable, dangerous. "Then say it," he said. Ariana held his gaze, her voice steady. "This was never about destroying the DeLuca bloodline," she said. "It was about replacing it." No reaction, but the air shifted. "You didn't want Adrian dead," she continued. "You wanted him weakened, exposed, surrounded by something he couldn't fight." Her hand moved then, not hidden this time, not subtle, resting fully, openly, over her abdomen. And that something was this. The truth didn't echo. It settled. Dominic's gaze dropped briefly, then returned to her face. And in that moment, there was no denial, because there didn't need to be. "Good," he said quietly. "You finally reached the part where you understand your purpose." Ariana's fingers curled slightly. "I was never your purpose," she said. "I was your leverage." A faint shift crossed his expression. Approval, because even now, he saw clarity as obedience. "You were chosen," Dominic said, stepping closer, "because you could carry what others could not." Ariana didn't move. "Not carry," she corrected. "Contain." His gaze sharpened again. "You're mistaking your role." "No," Ariana said softly. "I'm redefining it." That was the moment something broke. Not loudly, not visibly, but undeniably, because Dominic realized it. Not fully, but enough. She wasn't following the plan anymore. She was altering it, and that was something he had not accounted for. "You came here knowing this," he said slowly. "Yes, and you still walked into my control." Ariana's expression didn't waver. "No," she said. A beat passed. Then, "I walked into your blind spot." The words hit harder than anything else she had said, because Dominic Varelli did not have blind spots, except he did one. The same one that had built this entire plan. Certainty. "You believe you've changed the outcome," he said. Ariana didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached into her coat. Not fast, not threatening. Deliberate, controlled. Dominic didn't move, didn't stop her, because he wasn't afraid. And that was his mistake. Ariana placed a small device on the table between them. Simple, unremarkable, but active. Dominic's gaze flicked to it, then back to her. "What is this?" Ariana's voice was quiet. "Exposure." And then the doors opened, not behind her, behind him. Multiple steps, measured, armed. Adrian DeLuca walked in. The shift in power was immediate, not because of numbers, because of awareness. Dominic turned slowly, his expression no longer controlled in the same way, not shaken, but recalculating. "You brought him here," he said. Ariana didn't deny it. "I didn't bring him," she said. "I gave him the truth." Adrian's gaze moved between them, sharp, focused, already piecing together more than either of them had spoken. Not everything, but enough. "What truth?" Adrian asked. Ariana didn't look at him. Not yet, because this part had never been about words. It had always been about revelation. The war you think you're fighting, she said, her voice steady, was designed long before it began. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. And him? He asked, his gaze locking onto Dominic. Ariana finally turned her head. Just enough. He doesn't want your empire gone, she said. A pause. Then, he wants it rewritten. Silence followed. Heavy. Explosive. Because the truth. It didn't need explanation. It needed recognition. And Adrian, he saw it. Not fully. Not comfortably. But enough. Dominic exhaled slowly, his composure returning. But not completely. Because something had slipped. Something he couldn't immediately regain. You think this changes anything? He said. Ariana stepped back slightly. It already has. And that was when it happened. Not through words. Through realization. Dominic's gaze shifted. Not to Adrian. Not to men behind him. To Ariana. Then to her abdomen. And finally, understanding fully formed. Not controlled. Not planned. Not contained. You chose, he said quietly. Not to Adrian. To her. Ariana met his gaze. Yes. The word was final. Absolute. Because this was the one thing Dominic had never believed possible. Choice. Not manipulation. Not design. Not inevitability. Choice. You've destroyed your own value, he said. Ariana's expression hardened. No, she said. I've taken it back. And in that moment, the entire foundation of his plan collapsed. Because the child, the power, the future, it no longer belonged to him. It never had. What followed was not chaos, not immediate violence, something far more dangerous. Stalemate, because neither side could act without consequence. Not anymore, not with the truth exposed, not with the balance shifted. Dominic had lost control, not power, not influence, control, and that was what he needed most. Adrian stepped forward slightly, his presence steady but no longer neutral. Whatever this was, he said, his voice low, controlled, it ends now. Dominic didn't respond, not immediately, because endings were not something he accepted easily. But even he understood this version of the plan was over. His gaze returned to Ariana one last time, not with anger, not with rage, with something colder, recognition, because she had done the one thing no one else had ever managed. She had broken his design. You've changed the game, he said. Ariana didn't look away. No, she replied. I ended it. Time moved differently after that. Not faster, not slower, just differently. The war didn't disappear, but it shifted, because truth, once revealed, could not be undone. And Ariana, she was no longer part of either side. Not fully, not safely, but intentionally, because her role had changed. From pawn to protector to something else entirely. Something neither Dominic nor Adrian had expected. The future. Days later, standing at the edge of the estate, once more, Ariana felt the difference. Not in the world, in herself. The weight was still there, the danger, the uncertainty. But something else had taken its place. Clarity. Her hand rested gently over her abdomen, her gaze steady as the horizon stretched out before her. This child was not a weapon, not a tool, not a claim. It was a beginning, one that didn't belong to either empire, one that could reshape both. And for the first time, Ariana allowed herself to breathe without calculating the next move, not because the game was over, but because it had changed, irreversibly. Behind her, the world still moved, still watched, still waited, because power never disappeared. It evolved, just like Bloodlines did. Ariana's eyes softened slightly, her voice barely a whisper. You won't belong to their war. But even as she said it, she knew that wasn't entirely true, because some legacies could not be escaped, only rewritten. And as the wind shifted around her, carrying something distant, something unresolved, a quiet, undeniable truth settled into place. The child she carried wouldn't just survive this world. One day, it would rule it.